Hello, and welcome to the Geek on My Sleeve channel. Today we're doing a spoiler-free book review of Dungeon Lord, Otherworldly Powers, The Wraith's Haunt, Book 2 by Hugo Huesca, narrated by Jeff Hayes and Annie Ellicott. And now to Carl for the synopsis.
All right. So if you're new to the channel, we include a bit of spoilers from book one. Assume you've already gone through it and want to give you the lowdown on book two, keeping it as spoiler free as possible. So, end of book one is the Battle of Rova. Essentially, mind brood, parasite type thing, terrorizing the town. Edward makes a dungeon under the town, defeats said mind brood, and manages to come to kind of an understanding with the sheriff there to take all the people away to the haunt, protect them. Because otherwise, the church will just kill everyone as a precaution to make sure no mind broods get out, also known as Sapphire's Bane. Start of book two. It's now been a couple weeks since the Battle of Rova. Uh, Everybody's trying to get the haunt together. They're kind of still in recovery, rebuild mode. The majority of the villagers have been scattered out to other towns under the pretense that they weren't there. And then you have two groups of villagers still in the haunt. There's the group including the blacksmith and the alchemist who feel it would pretty much be better for them to stay at the haunt. The blacksmith kind of has this sense of loyalty to Edward for saving his family, and he's kind of seen the good part or the good aspects of Edward. And then you have the second group where if they let them go back out into the world, they won't be able to keep their mouths shut. So they're essentially prisoners, and you can kind of see where that's going to go. Not really the most mm, agreeable situation for everyone involved. And yeah, we pretty much start off from there, starting to scale things up. The first book was only a couple days, and the second book takes place over a larger time frame where we get the next round of challenges. Still continue a lot of the same storylines there, even though we've kind of defeated the first round. Now comes round two. Trying really hard not to spoil anything. Help me out a bit here, Pete.
So, I guess a big part of it that you figure out in the first chapter is someone is summoning a wraith. So it's kind of ironic because with the spiders end up giving Edward the nickname Lord Wraith, and a big part of book two is summoning a wraith and build up in the battle with the wraith. That's the next, I guess, hurdle we have to. Book one was primarily the Mind Brood, and then book two is, Lord Wraith gets to take on a real Wraith.
And all the undead associated with it. We get to see a lot more of the same characters we got introduced to in book one and have come to know and love. See their progression, as well as a handful of new characters get introduced to the cast. And yeah, a number of other challenges that come with running a dungeons haunt slash village, for lack of a better word, and everything else associated with it. And check out our live stream. As we said, this book does a great job kind of building and filling in some of the details, building more lore for us for Ivalice, as well as just scaling and progression, uh, keeping things moving along. So, with that said, now we'll talk a bit about the review and our feelings for it. Uh, this is one of my favorite lit RPGs. I know we say that a lot. We've said in the first one, it kind of feels a little bit more D&D Dungeons and Dragons esque than actual pure lit RPG slash video game mechanics. Those are still there, but they're also still there in the D&D sense, right? If anybody's familiar with D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, this story feels very familiar. What else you got with that, Pete?
So, yeah, I'd agree with that. It doesn't have so many video game or lit RPG aspects. It's still kind of an undertone, like we know from book one, because he was on the hero side and he defeats Kale, which he's now taken his spot. But yeah, on the other side, when he's actually in Ivalice, it feels very much D&D esque with the amount of spells you're allowed to cast based off of your levels and so on and so forth. But this book, it's more of a dark fantasy, and you get that feel, but at the same time, it does a great job, kind of like The Land does for me, which is another lit RPG where you'll get into a serious situation and then you'll get that comic relief, or you'll really get the way that he ties everything together between the new world for him being Ivalice. He gets into a situation and he relates it to the real world as we know it, and how he would have dealt with it, and how, maybe it's just a myth or whatever, such as, other races and elves and yada yada, but now he's actually in it, so it does well bringing the real world feel to Ivalice. And then it also, oh man, the character develops and we get more backstory all the way around. And yeah, it's just an enjoyable series as a whole.
And building on the realism, part of the reason when we talk about this book that we feel it's more on the mature rating is because it feels so real, right? Combat, blood, guts, these people in these situations, it's not as sunshine and rainbows. It's a lot of swearing, a bit of graphics, so on and so forth. And yet, when I think about if I was in those situations or somebody I know was in those situations, we would be probably dropping a lot of F bombs, swearing, cursing, uh, doing what we can to survive and keep our sanity in these crazy situations. And for me, sometimes swearing and stuff bothers people. And if that bothers you, this might not be the series for you. But for me, it kind of lends to the authenticity of the situation to where here we have this young guy thrown in this world, and as he's doing what he can to survive fighting these undead, he's one F bomb after the other, just doing what he can to keep it together and not panic, and relating it back to the real world and all those other situations.
Another thing this book series does well, or at least this book in particular in the series, you kind of get it from both sides. Where, you've got our hero or our main guy, and then you've got the, evil villain monologue and the evil villain doing his thing. And then you get to understand their mentality from both sides. And it's kind of that weird thing, like you could feel for them, but it's just something that not a whole lot of books do. Normally, it's always from the main character side, or it's like a third person, kind of like the world. It's like not really a main character. So I really enjoy the way it kind of bounces back and forth, and it doesn't really do time hops between them, but yeah, it works out well explaining it from both sides.
I agree with you. It really adds to the story, getting the other side, the other perspective. It helps with a bit of the world building, but also just lends a bit of empathy to their cause and their situation. We are following a dungeon lord who is supposed to be seen as evil, bad guy, pretty much the boss at the end of a dungeon for the MMO, or in Ivalice, you know, they're pretty much like seen as demons, and yet we can relate to him, and he's doing all these quote unquote good things, even though he's a servant of the dark, and yet we see a lot of quote servants of the light doing these different things, and yeah, it's a lot of fun to see their motivations, see where they're coming from, what drives them, and then deal with that clash at the end. Not to mention, we pointed it out already, the comic relief, the action, the adventuring. There's just so many good aspects of this book, and it's not just simply hanging out in the dungeon, right?
Yeah, and from the first book, we had the quote for the Faustian Gambit, or essentially, make a deal with the devil, and due to your moral values, you won't be turned evil. That's a short version, but it stays true to that because he's put into situations where people won't even give him the benefit of the doubt, but he's still doing the best he can and he's rationalizing it and he's, you know, picking up the pieces and adjusting and reassessing as he goes on. And that's something that is very encouraging with the series. They've got their magical rules of objectivity, which we get more lore throughout that. And then he's got his Faustian gambit that he's, trying to stay true to himself, but at the same time, he's realizing that this is a different world. Back in my other world, I wasn't being attacked by horned spiders or, you know, killing little girls with mind eating parasites.
It's a lot of fun. We plan to continue working our way through this series, working it into our Geek on My Sleeve / live book discussions. We've already done this book, but if you've made it this far, highly suggest you push through book 2 and continue on to book 3 with us. We're kind of pacing these out at most once a month, so you have time to get through this and on to the next one. And we hope you'll be able to join us for the upcoming live discussions, currently every Sunday.